I didn't get the results that I expected. It was actually surprising for me, but pleasantly surprising.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Other reactions?
And I think I was expecting worse. I think that was the idea for me. I was expecting myself to be even worse. I guess.
And I think anytime we take an assessment, a lot of times we'll think that we're going to do worse than we actually do, so we try to surprise ourselves. Other reactions? Yeah.
So I guess I clicked fast. I got through 3 of them.
Okay.
And it was interesting that after a while, after I got the hang of it, I could almost feel the bias coming out. Like, oh, I really want to click bad equals something, but no, all right, this is the right answer. And the first time I couldn't feel that.
So once you got more comfortable with the rhythm, then it's like, oh, I could actually maybe change the results of this by how I do it.
Maybe. Well, no,
Yeah.
I could feel what I wanted to click. Like I could feel
Okay.
the automatic
Okay.
wanting to respond a certain way when that wasn't the right answer.
Yeah, I bet.
Okay, so I took the same test twice to try to see if once I took it honestly, and the second time I did everything wrong to see if it would give me a different answer. The first time I think I got 3 red X's. Just, moving too fast, everybody's got their excuse for that. And so it came up that I have an inherent bias to favor, European Americans over African Americans. Second time through, I did everything possible to associate everything good with the African Americans and everything bad with the European Americans. And just to try to see if it would give me a different answer where to say that I favor African Americans. And it did not. In the end, it told me that there were too many mistakes to come up with a thing. So.
It's just that it's hard to trick the test.
Very hard to track.
So if I intentionally did maybe 3 or 4 questions wrong.
Well, it gauges your response time as well. Yeah, so it knows that you're thinking through.
My question, and I agree with everything that I've heard my colleagues say about, it was kind of surprising, and I think I came off a little better than I thought I would. But my question about the way it's administered, how much of a test is it of our associations than it is a test of our ability to sort? So in the first iteration, good, bad, or American, African American, so that's easy, we get that going. The next time through, we have to just adjust, but we're running through the same options, love, glorious, nasty. So that part's already in our brain. That part we know is bad, is whatever. We just have to, the container has moved. So is it a test of association, or is it really a test of can our brain figure out where the container is now? That would be my question.
Based on, it is an association test. It's clearly an association test.
And some of them are actually trials in that part of the assessment. So not every time you go through there is actually part of that assessment tool. So there are some times where it's giving you practice before it actually assesses.
So it's kind of like the SAT in that there's always a test section that may not count towards your score.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
And similar to what she said, I would maybe say that if somebody like me, and I'm not trying to make excuses, I'm just bringing this up, I think I got 3 red X's when I was trying to answer it honestly. And I would say that that's too small of a data set to come up with a final conclusion with.
It's because it's not about the answer you gave, it's about the speed of associating one thing with another. So
And I know I got a negative connotation with the European American on one of those.
So what they're testing is not if you're answering right or wrong, but rather what is the speed in associating one value word with a particular image. So even if you got it right or wrong, the data that they're using to give you results is not based on just those three. It's about the speed that it took for the whole test.
I want to say, I appreciate the way that you, when you started this, you all set up, this is what the test is to let us know. And I feel like a little heavy in my heart a little bit that we're sitting here talking and attacking the test. And it's kind of what happens in this work about whiteness, about racism, that we want to attack anything but what's actually happening. So I just wanted to get my 2 cents on that.
And I think I would add too that this is really for your own knowledge and your own ability to be able to look at yourself honestly. So you can take the test and try to, not answer it honestly, but this is really about trying to get an honest assessment of where you are, not to beat it or to criticize it. I agree with that.
Is there some methodology for getting a cumulative profile based on all the different tests?
No, not that I'm aware of. And again, we really encourage you to go back. I mean, there are so many tests, but no, it does not give you a composite score. I mean, these things are issues related to body image and all kind of gender issues, so it's very complex. So no, you don't get a overall assessment.
Oh, we both took the same test.
We took the Asian American and White American test, and I was just struck by the images and kind of insulted by the pictures of the Asian people represented. It kind of looked like they took white people, put black hair on them, and then kind of
Slanted the eyes.
slanted the eyes.
Oh, wow.
My experience doing association, and then every time I get an X, I'm going, oh, so when that same picture came, then I had to correct it. Even to me, though, my association was a totally different answer. So that's my only criticism about that particular test.
I wanted to just expand a little bit on what Ricky was expressing. I think also just to open the door for self-compassion. Of course, this is what we do. Like a human being, that's something that is assessing, something that is so personal, intimate, and consequential in my relationships with people that I care, the people around me. And if I'm being disappointed in any way, I'm going to first question the tool. Of course I would. I mean, if I take a test that questions my identity as a Puerto Rican, right? I'm gonna go after the tool. This is so important, and I think I have it defined and very clearly for me.
Yes, and then we're going to move on so
Right.
we can get into our discussion.
I think to follow up on what Ruth was saying, my comment was not necessarily to question the tool or question its validity. I really want to understand the methodology behind it. I'm an educator. I want to understand what I'm doing in the classroom. If I'm doing something that will not teach my students or help them learn or help me be a better teacher, I'm not going to use it. I want to understand something so that I can understand what it's telling me too. So I think I would totally take another one of these. I would totally retake the ones I took. I just would want to understand more. I see what you guys were saying about the quality of the images. Is that a factor? I just want to understand the methodology.
So there is an additional, there's some frequently asked question and background information. So I really encourage you to sort of delve into, there's a lot of research studies that have been, as Al said, that have been done as a result of this work, that people have used the data set to do research papers that are also available on here. So you all got to see your results that look something like this. And if you didn't get a chance to save it to a PDF, when you go back in again, you can print them out. But I just wanted to make sure that people understand that the percentages in here are not for you, but they're to compare what your result was to the rest of the people who had taken the assessment. So it gives you an idea of where, so for example, for all the people that took the assessment, there was a strong automatic preference for white people compared to black people, 27%, and then a strong automatic preference for black people compared to white people, 2%. And then the area where there's no preference, is 17% in terms of the collection of respondents. So again, it's really, we encourage you to explore this and to think about, would this be something that you would have your students take in a class, and then what would the discussion be as a result of that? So I think it really, I think the other thing, the other uses of this, these results in terms of how you can use your results, you know, these are confidential and they're your results, so they don't have to be shared with others. But knowing what your results are, I think make you more conscious of your own bias, your own unconscious biases or conscious biases, and it may change the way you interact with others. So I think it's important to use this information and say, okay, if I have, if my results weren't strong in terms of issues on ableism and interacting with people who are differently able, what can I do differently in terms of how I interact? Well, how can I change that, or how can I interact more with people where there may be some unconscious bias? If you do decide, you know, we're encouraging people to take risks. If you do decide to share results with other people, make sure you do it in a place where you're going to feel safe and comfortable to do that. And so that you can get some affirmation about some things that you want to share that may show some of your vulnerability. So again, this is an opportunity for you to be able to change the dialogue that you've had about these issues with others. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rut.
Okay, let's see if I can be crafty.
There.
So what was the eye opener for you?
All right. Okay. All right. So a few things before I start with this slide. In front of you, you have a toolkit, a little toolkit that we will use in our small group. So just so you know why they're there. And if you, for some reason, you don't have one, let me know. I have more. Okay. So this piece really, when I was planning on even getting the proposal in, there were very, very many reasons in my mind I wanted to do it. The one is because sometimes we are surprised, particularly about this negative reactions and resistance, negative resistance, to something that we might be very excited about. So I wanted to kind of talk about, at least in one of the sessions, about how normal this is, particularly looking through it through the lenses of bias. Well, of course, we would react this way. It makes sense, and often that is kind of the way that I respond to myself when I see this reaction. So something I'm very passionate about, right? I'm like, why do you not like what I like? Oh, well, it makes sense. So I want to talk basically on this part of our session about it makes sense. And then, how do we respond to it? And I wanted it to be early in the month, April 1st, kind of worked out, so that we also generated some skills and practice about how to respond to something so common and normal and to be expected as the resistance to this work of analyzing and exploring what whiteness means for us, what's the context, and what is the consequence of that. Okay? But I wanted to focus on the biased resistance to Whiteness History Month. There are many reasons to have resistance to this work, and we're going to focus only on one of them. But I wanted to create some space to name the many other reasons to have resistance to this work. And one is, trauma associated with experience related to race and racism. And there are many. So maybe my experiences with trauma, I haven't healed, I haven't processed this. My experience is that I haven't found a safer space to process that and heal. Then of course, I don't want to talk about it. It would make sense, right? It could be lack of trust in the capacity of the institution. And actually, for many staff and faculty of color and students of color have expressed this to me. Like, I don't know that PCC can handle this, right? So there's a lack of trust. And sometimes status quo, because I know it, feels safer than, rattling the cage, right? Because then I don't know what's going to happen. And am I going to be the target for the discomfort of some people, right? And so there's a lot of anxiety around that. Of course it would, right? Makes sense. Painful memories. This is the experience of whiteness, and the discussion around whiteness can create or raise to the surface, I guess, painful memories. And I just would rather not experience pain. Okay, makes sense, right? Fear for safety. Again, it makes sense. We are talking about something that is intimate. It's about our own identities and our relationships with one another, and we don't talk about it often. So it's not a normal, in the sense that it's not common, topic of conversation. So we are afraid for what are the consequences of bringing up something as delicate as this, and is there going to be a threat for my safety? Am I going to feel like I want to punch somebody? Right? So there might be fear around safety. And then there's bias, right? So that is the part that we are going to discuss. Oh, I have it. Oh, right. All right. So I wanted to start with the baseline. So I'm sure that many of you know about the next few slides, so I'm going to get through it. But if you have questions, just stop me, right? Just stop me. If I'm going too fast, this is more important than anything else that comes after. Having this baseline of understanding how we create bias, right? So we basically took some tests and some experience like, oh, I have bias, but not too bad, but I have bias, right? So how do we create, how is it that our brains are inhabited by bias? So we'll talk about how culture does that for us, how personal experiences do that for us, and how the moment in history that we happen to live in also inform those biases. So we're going to talk about culture using the model of an iceberg. I like this model for many reasons. One of them because I get to talk about the Titanic. So the Titanic sank because the iceberg under the water is much, 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 much bigger than the tip of the iceberg, right? So they didn't see, of course, what was underwater. So that we can see culture in that way. We see on the tip of the iceberg, when we talk about culture and when the things that we are mostly aware of are things like art and drama and games and cooking and dresses, right? Maybe things that we see at a museum and that we very quickly associate with culture. But culture is much, much, much bigger and more consequential under the water. So I'm going to ask you to just look at some of these aspects of culture that are primarily out of awareness or under the water. And just say or share with the group which ones are either very important to you or surprising, or you're not really clear what they mean.
Hey, good. Kind of small for me. I can't read.
And it's kind of blurry. We were trying to fix that. So maybe we can read out loud some of them.
We can turn off
some of the lights for a moment.
Try to control costs also. Right behind it. Yeah.
Can you bring it back?
Yeah.
Because now it's smaller. Even.
I can do that.
So notions of modesty, patterns of superior-subordinate relations, conception of justice, notions of leadership,
You're welcome.
attitudes to the dependent, theory of disease, patterns of visual perception, body language, conversational patterns, ordering of time, notions of adolescence are some of them. What are nice. Anybody wants to answer what do they mean by order of time? It's a fun one. Order of time. Sam?
The little I know, some folks see time as a linear object and some see it as circular. And there are other.
Also, the priority we might give to
right.
the past or the present moment or the future.
And just what we view as progress.
Mm-hmm.
It's a word that's fraught with problems.
And
What is progress
related
and
to
how
how
do
we
we do
view time.
Yeah, exactly.
I think part of it is also the value we put on, for example, in certain parts of the United States, people put a great value on, you must be on time, you must be punctual. Other places, take a half an hour, it's all good. And other places in the world, let's clock.
Right? And then, because of those, we create meaning, basically. Culture allows us, or makes us, create meaning. And then we not only treat, in this example, time differently, but we also decide what is right and what is wrong. So, to be late is wrong, right? In most parts of the United States, right? My father has never lived in the United States, and he says at 3:30 he's still 3. So he's still on time. So in the Iceberg that we operate, let's call Portland Community College, if I arrive at 3:30 to a 3 o'clock meeting, what are some assumptions that may be made about me?
Disorganized.
I'm disorganized.
Your whole group is gonna be playing those damn Puerto Ricans.
Those damn Puerto Ricans, so I represent all Puerto Ricans, okay?
You don't respect other people's time.
I'm disrespectful. You see how we are creating meaning. So it's not just that we treat time differently. It's not just differently. There's a value connected to difference. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So these are things that we share. So culture is something that we share with a group of people in some meaningful ways. I don't think that there is identical icebergs for anybody, right? But this is a experience of group. This is called the diversity wheel. And it's a way to understand that my individual experiences in creating meaning, in creating value. And that is kind of like each of these levels or dimensions are lenses, filters. And through them, I create meaning about myself, about others, and others create meaning about me. And sometimes they coincide and sometimes they don't. Right? So, since I was a child, I've been hyper extroverted. That has never changed. With you, yes. Many of you know, right? And that's never changed. So there are things about me that might not have a lot to do with culture, but culture perhaps either nurtured it, or I've been just stubborn, which is a possibility. So then the internal dimensions have a different impact about how I create meaning for myself and others. I'll give you an example. I was at a meeting where I happened to mention that I'm 40, and the person at that meeting said, "Oh, I'm so relieved. I thought you were 20-something, and I was worried about if I was going to learn from you." We create meaning, right? And of course, at that point, I was happy to be 40. Right? Okay? So that created meaning for me too. I decided because I'm 40, I have something to say that people should listen to. Right? So we create meaning about ourselves and about others. And that happens at the internal dimensions, and these internal dimensions are some dimensions that we have very little, if any, control, right? I might lie about my age, but my experiences are still attached to how many years I've been in the US, or, I mean, that's been very meaningful to me. My gender, my race, my ethnicity, right? And then the external dimensions they're a little bit more fluid. For example, when I moved to the US, just the geographic location had a tremendous amount of change and transformation for me. Geographic, boom, lots of change. How I create meaning about myself and the world. And so on, organizational dimensions at PCC, if I work at PCC, how many years I've worked at PCC have a great deal of meaning for me and for others, right? So I'll give you an example. Some years ago, I was driving on I-84, and very responsible driver. This driver came from behind me, shoo, and then went in front of me, and I'm driving, and I go, this guy! I didn't know the gender or sex of the driver, but immediately, this guy. And in my mind, I know how old this person is, if they have facial hair or not. I mean, really, I have an image that's implicit bias. And that is created through these lenses, both the iceberg and the diversity wheel. Then, this car that now is in front of me, and I'm furious. And at that point, I'm thinking, I just want to accelerate and hurt this person. But what happened? I saw a bumper sticker that said, "Ecoexist." And I calmed down a little bit, and I'm like, it's hard to ecoexist with you. But I'm calming down, there's a peace sign, I'm kind of okay with that. And then there was another bumper sticker. It was one of those yellow triangles that says, "Baby on board." Nothing was more transformative than that, because at that moment I said to myself, she must be on her way to pick up the baby. We do this every day. We create meaning about ourselves and others. And not just meaning. We identify this is standard, and we'll talk about that, or normal, or not standard, or abnormal. That those attachments, value attachments, have to do with not only our iceberg and our lenses and filters, but also with the moment in history where we live in. We live in a post-colonial world. And I put quotes because in my experience, I don't see what's about post-colonialism, right? Yeah. So this is active. This is something that I experience every day, that I can see it every day. We all are, this post-colonial or colonialism is imposed on all of us, whether it's benefiting us or it's not. And that means that there is a group of people that in their iceberg and through their lenses decide, my way of thinking, the meanings I've created are better than these other different meanings. So then difference is not just difference. I worked at a daycare in 1999, and I remember this 5-year-old boy came to one of the teachers and said, "Miss Georgia, you're black." I went, "Yes, we are." And there was no value in his behavior or any other expression. Difference was difference. But that's not what we do. With a post-colonial world, we attach value to difference. Our icebergs decide this is good, this is bad, because they're different. So difference is not just difference. We live, and then these differences are then put in these antagonizing dualities. The iceberg decides This is what's good. You're not supposed to be late. That's normal. That's healthy. That's legal. Being late is abnormal, pathological, illegal. And there's very little range. It's very rigid. It tends to be very rigid. And if we are to say, you know, let's talk about whiteness as the iceberg. So whiteness is one of those icebergs. An iceberg that has impacted us in a tremendous way. And whiteness, and this is not the world of white people, whiteness, the way that we value things is very rigid. And inside of that iceberg, there's some things that are valued at a higher level than others. Okay? So this is our moment in history. So we create biases because our brains are wired to do that. I like telling this story because it taught me so much about my own biases. Biases are a prejudgment before I know, let's say, something in particular. When I was about 9, I went to a pool, and that was a big deal for me to be in a pool. I grew up in a very rural area, and my pool was a creek down the hill. So I went to this pool, and I remember we were in the station wagon, and all I had was my swimming wear and a towel. And we arrived, and I ran up the stairs and through the living room, and I could see the pool, so I knew going to the pool. I don't remember who these people are. Don't remember. Friends of the family, I don't know. All I remember is the pool. Before getting to the pool, I was stopped by a glass door. Glass door. I don't go around trying to walk through glass door anymore. I have prejudged all glass surfaces as hard. So we call that learning. Effectively, right? But I prejudge all glass surfaces. I don't try to get to know each glass surface personally. Right? Our brains are wired to do that, and in most cases, it serves us very well. It has some serious pitfalls, though. Especially when it comes to personal relationships, to relationships across icebergs. Okay. So, something we need to kind of access when we want to say, okay, so I get it, there's bias, it's a human experience, what do I do about it? Well, we need to kind of reach in and be very vulnerable with ourselves at least, and talk about, what am I ready for? So there might be, I am in denial of my bias because my personal identity is attached to being good person who doesn't have bias. Well, if you don't have bias, you're not a human being. You have a different brain. Right? So I need to then start the work of awareness. There is bias, and this part of doing this test is that process of awareness. And the process of awareness never ends. We will never know everything, or the existence of everything. So we engage in awareness work. And sometimes that is very challenging, but sometimes it's just enough challenge. Right? I might go to a fair, like, oh, look, I've never seen this ingredient in food. I'll try it. Right? I've never read literature from such and such country. I'm going to try it. So then I start the work of awareness. And it's great to start that work of awareness with knowing about bias, because then you can see your own reactions and what are some of the values that you place in the experiences you're having. And then we start understanding context. Like, okay, so I understand where this bias comes from and you know why it came about, and I can address my biases in that way. And I might attend an AWARE meeting, and AWARE stands for
Alliance of Anti-White Racist Educators.
Or I attend a C meeting, which stands for Support, Engage, Empower, or an affinity group around you, or a group that is dedicated to addressing the biases that you are trying to explore and understand, right? And then you engage in activism. Well, let's do something. So we're going to culminate this session. Hopefully we'll end before 4, like at 3:30. That's my goal. We'll see. With some tools for a little bit of activism work, okay? Okay, so these are diversity readiness levels. So I might be at awareness level, what is discovery? What is it?
The yellow one, mono.
Wow, you have very good sight. I don't. Clearly, discovery, understanding, and then social justice, which is activism. And one of the ways that we know where we're at in terms of readiness, so we can focus on what activities I can engage in, next, is by looking at the descriptors of each stage. So for discovery, I might be unfamiliar with diversity and maybe with diversity terminology. Like for example, what is whiteness? Why are people talking about whiteness? Right? Have not participated in diversity training or education. Understands the legal reasons for numerical diversity. Like, okay, I'm engaging and I'm for diversity because the numbers, and it might not have any understanding of context and consequence. Maybe I'm ready for understanding. So at this level, there's awareness of culture, race and class and other aspects of identity that impact our relationships. We begin to focus on my awareness. What's my difference? What's that diversity wheel? And what are the aspects of identity that are creating meaning for me? And appreciation of other cultures and heritages. And then for activism, it is, of course, marked by action. Okay? So we do something. The thing about action, however, is that sometimes we get a little impatient with ourselves. I feel guilty because I'm not acting. Well, we need to kind of understand how come we're not acting. Every time I act to further the goals of diversity and inclusion, I am risking. Every time. If I'm not risking, I'm doing something else. It's a risk. Because we're challenging systems of belief that are core to the way that we view the world. Of course, it's hard. And it's a lot of risk.
I learned the replacement for the word risk. I just love it. It changed my life. Opportunity.
It is indeed an opportunity. And I can see how that is a powerful way of switching it, but I want to emphasize the part that it is risky. I might be threatened. And I might get hate mail. I might get, stopped. So I don't see opportunity there.
No, I understand. I understand. I've had people be angry at me too.
Yeah, so I want to emphasize that piece. Also, there's advocacy, and there's continued self-work. Okay, but the most difficult aspect of doing something about bias is identifying it. Is seeing it, because it's like the air we breathe. We're immersed in that iceberg, and it's underwater, and it's so hard to even identify it because we are so used to it. I mean, when people call me and say, "Rut, you're so exotic," and I get offended. People don't understand what's so offensive about that? Well, and then of course I have to explain it, which is another unknown part of it, but it is invisible for folks who say, what's offensive about that?
I have a question, hopefully it doesn't throw you off too much. The word bias always gets me. I wonder if it's a softer way of saying racist in context. And I just wonder what you think, so I can't figure it out.
Yes, so it is indeed, it is kind of softer, but it's not the same.
Okay.
There is bias in racism, right? It is about bias. It's a bias that is informed and nurtured by white supremacy and values of white supremacy, right? I might have biases that are not related to, let's say, systems of oppression, right? And that are not supported by institutions or systems or communities.
So I think I hear you saying then that bias is the same as prejudice.
Yes, bias is the same as prejudice. Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
My only hesitation is that there sometimes are non-negative biases.
Thank you.
So that, I mean, the expression that, you know, if you have a family member, for example, who obviously you care for, so you may have a bias toward that family member, and that may not actually be non-negative, I don't know, but I think that sometimes that particular word gets associated with all of the non-negatives, and I don't know that it's always a negative word. And actually, I would like to know what you think about that.
Yeah, a bias, I'll just target myself, so I'm not targeting anybody else, right? Let's say that there is a bias about Puerto Ricans as hard workers, which there is no such thing, right? The bias is not that. But let's say, right? And I am not as hard worker as I could be. That bias might benefit me in many ways, but it's not accurate about me and the person who I am. And in that, always, doesn't matter how positive a shine is lit up on me, if it's not accurate about who I am, it's a negative bias. Because it has consequences for me. For example, I have students that are Asian Pacific Islanders, and there's a bias, and people call it positive bias, that they're very smart. And I had one student that was failing 3 of her 5 classes. And she had to deal not only with the fact that she was failing, but she had this self-hatred that she had to deal with only because, and shame, because of that so-called positive bias about her heritage.
So I think the only distinction, I'm just trying to make the distinction. So sometimes in my mind, bias is more associated with preference than it is with a negative or a non-negative. But that may be a way that I'm associating the word that maybe isn't helpful. So do you, I mean, if I have a bias toward Fords, for example, that to me is more of a preference than, or if I have a bias in that sense. So, but maybe I shouldn't be, or maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm trying to avoid the negative terms, and maybe that's maybe not as helpful a way to look at it.
I get it. So and actually this is a great moment for this conversation before we go into this. What we need to do in order to engage in activism with our biases is to learn what they are, right? And there are things that I have a preference for, that I'm not going to do anything about that bias.
Okay.
Anything chocolate will get my vote, right? I'm not going to do anything about that bias. Now, that might not be beneficial because not everything chocolate is going to be good, right? So every time I use my bias to make decisions, I risk it not being accurate, because a bias or prejudice is this decision or conclusion I've arrived before I really know. So biases always have risk, and a bias that is about a person has a huge risk.
Thank you. The example you used as a student, I would look at that as a stereotype. So does stereotype kind of fit in with under the umbrella of bias?
All stereotypes are a bias, are a prejudice, right? We have created categories based not on all the people in there. It's not based on those specific individuals. It's just this broad generalization, right? So all of these words are very related. Okay, other questions, comments? Okay. So there are common themes to biases, and this list is also, Laura and I have used it for talking about microaggressions, which are charged with prejudices and stereotypes, right? And there's some common themes. And I listed them for today because it's good to know, in order for us to identify the biases, it's good to know what are the common themes. This is very hard to identify them, right? So the common themes are, you don't belong in this land, which is this, the expression, you're so exotic. It's actually an expression of, you're not from here. You don't belong. Ascription of intelligence, when people are surprised that I can put together a sentence. Like, that has a lot to do with the value placed on what they perceive are my identities. Color blindness. So we, and particularly in the US, one of the part of whiteness and part of systems of oppression is to say that what is best is to not see difference. And that's like the nirvana place. Well, when we don't see difference, first of all, we're missing out a lot of the information. We're also denying the consequences of difference. So when we engage in comments or behaviors that are informed by this value of color blindness, we're engaging in bias. Assuming that because of one or more aspects of my identity, I regularly engage in criminal behavior, or my family. Denial of, I'm not a racist, right? Never, I wouldn't. And I said, well, you must be traveling from a very different time. Because we are the obvious consequence of our moment in history. None of us, we're permeable. So none of us are impermeable. This is part of us. And that's part of how awful and unjust this all is. Because systems of oppression, these icebergs of oppression and subordination are imposed on us. When we think, or say things about, only if you worked harder. But because naturally, the harder you work, naturally, the more you get. Even though our experience speaks to the contrary. Another common theme is pathologizing culture and values and communication styles. I've worked in the field of domestic and sexual violence, and one of the most common interventions for survivors is teaching assertive, direct communication. What do you think that does?
Empowers the woman or the survivor.
Empowers, what else?
I was going to say, it probably angers the abuser. Are we talking about being in that, when there's a different...
Not very useful, right? It might be risky. What else are we doing when we're telling survivors? You need to learn to speak directly and assertively.
The way you speak now is not right. Yeah.
It's their fault. The way you speak provoked the whole thing. Right? So we're saying the problem is you. Right? So if you're having an experience of bias, well, you might need to see what you can do different. Right? So then also direct communication style is a Western style. 80% of the world population uses indirect communication style. But we call direct communication style healthy, ethical, responsible, professional. So 80% of the world is what? Unhealthy, unprofessional, unethical, wrong.
Then you will never get a job in the United States.
If we don't get a job in the United States, right? Or we lose our job in the United States.
You need to brag about yourself in the jury, right?
I'm the best.
Yeah.
Hard worker.
There you go, something to learn about that. Okay, and the list also includes second-class citizen, like you are part of us, but not so much. Sexist, heterosexist language, objectifying, dehumanizing language, and traditional gender roles, prejudicing and stereotyping. So all of these are common themes, and a lot of times these themes are interwoven, as you will see with the examples that we're going to examine. Okay, so in small groups, and the way that I was hoping is that each table can be 4 people, but if you feel more comfortable in diets, or just 2 people, or 4 around, yes, leadershiping is good. And I will go to your groups and I will give you a random selection of some of the biased, negative, resistance messages that we got. These are real resistance. And we're going to discuss first what is the bias and then, if any, and then we will talk together about what are some potential responses if we hear something similar in the future during Whiteness History Month or not. Okay, so let me see if I can identify the groups.